All right. I think we are good to go. Just gonna double check here. There we are. Perfect. All right. Hey everybody. Thanks for joining here. This is the Solution1 conference, online talking about .NET and everything like that. Um, Today, I'm going to be talking about making a trip from Xamarin to Maui. So we're going to be kind of going over from a high level of how we go from where we were to kind of our new mobile development world out here in .NET. I'm Mike Stonis. I'm the president over at 8bot. We do mobile development using .NET and other .NET technologies and things like that. So we do a lot of IoT and chatbots and all that kind of good stuff. You can get to me on Twitter. So it's at Michael Stonis. We'll see how long that holds up here going forward in the future. But at least for now, you can get to me out on there. And if anybody has any questions or anything afterwards, I'm also out in the chat. So if you have any questions, I'll be checking that afterwards out here as well. All right. So like I said, we are going to be making a journey today. And our journey is going to be around doing cross-platform development. So, for a good long time here, as .NET developers, we've had the ability to go and target multiple platforms. So it's not just, web, it's not just server side. We can develop for Mac OS, iOS, Android, all the tablets and all that kind of good stuff as well. But the way that we've gone about it has been primarily driven by Xamarin, right? So in the past, that's kind of where I got my start on a lot of mobile development as well as doing Xamarin. But we're kind of moving forward now. The community has evolved, and we're moving to our new location, which is Maui. Unfortunately, we can't go all to Maui out in Hawaii. But that's the idea, is we're making our transition from where we were in the past out to where we're going to be in the future for doing mobile development. Xamarin, for anybody who's not familiar, and I assume that there's some people that maybe haven't seen this before, or this would be new for them. When we think of it, for a lot of people, it's probably going to be in terms of Xamarin Forms. Xamarin comes in a few different flavors or a few different setups out here, but the one that most people are familiar with is going to be Xamarin Forms. And really what that's going to be out there for you is to give us a sort of a interface on top of different platforms to write cross-platform code. So if you think of it kind of from a really high-level view, every kind of user interface platform has something like a button. A lot of them have something like a text entry or whatnot. And so what Xamarin Forms does is it takes all those native controls and then it wraps them so that we can generically communicate to those native components. So, in the real world or at runtime, what we might think of for a Xamarin Forms developer as being a button might on iOS be something like a UI button, or on Android might be an Android widget button. But the cool part as a developer is we don't really need to know that, but the actual, and then the actual application runs out there using the real components from the UI libraries on those platforms. It's been out here for a while. It's crazy to think that Xamarin Forms was originally introduced in 2014. So we're, not quite at a decade, but we're coming up pretty close. And it's got support for a ton of different platforms out there. Primarily, I would say mobile platforms like iOS and Android, but desktop platforms as well out on Windows and other platforms like Tizen and Linux through the community support and things like that as well. Forms, though, is coming to an end. So, the journey there that we may have had with Forms, and for a lot of us, loving it for all these years out here, is coming to an end. And so, the world of .NET has changed dramatically in the last, we'll say 10 years. It's changed dramatically even from the start of this year to now, as we'll kind of talk about. But, if you're a Forms developer, the support for Forms is going to end in about a year and a half, right? So we've got till about May 2024 when we're going to be looking to transition. And so what I want to talk about is sort of where we're at today. What would you do if you're a Forms developer today, or if you were developing cross-platform applications using Xamarin today, and how do we take that journey over to Maui? All right. So just one quick little thing here with diving into what Xamarin looks like today from more of like a technical perspective is that there's sort of two different approaches. We've got what's sometimes referred to as Xamarin Native, so Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, where realistically what you would be doing out there is building user interfaces just like you would if you were a native developer. So you might be using UI buttons if you're on iOS and view controllers. And if you're on Android, you might be using fragments and widget controls and all that kind of good stuff. But you truly natively build out your user interface and then you share your backend business logic. This isn't as common nowadays, I would say. It's still doable, but not as common. The more common way that a lot of people do their applications with Xamarin nowadays would be with forms. And the big difference there, kind of like I had mentioned, is that we've got that shared UI layer. So, sort of up on top, you could see here that we've got that sort of our platform sort of pushed up there. And we don't really need to be concerned about what happens all the time on iOS or Android or Windows. We just know that we build a button, we set its properties, and when we click it, it will go do the right thing on that platform. The great benefit that we have here, though, as you can see, is we've got shared UI and shared business logic. So it's sort of a write once, run everywhere sort of situation from that perspective. The way that we're writing all that shared code in forms then is using something called .NET Standard. So .NET Standard, at the time it was made, was kind of to say, listen, we've got all these different .NET platforms that we're running on nowadays, and we need some way to generically say, here is some .NET code that could run across all these different platforms. So, if we're talking about iOS or Android or something that's going to be running out on a Linux server in Azure, how do we describe something that's going to look or be able to behave the same way across all those platforms? And so what .NET Standard did is it said, hey, essentially with .NET Standard 1, here's the minimal amount of .NET that you can get away with. And with each new version of .NET Standard, they sort of added more features and more features, but supported fewer and fewer platforms. So the idea being this kind of onion model where we could say, with .NET Standard 2.1, for example, we've got quite a lot of .NET features in there. I can't remember the exact figure for the percentage of support, but it's pretty high for how much of the overall .NET landscape is supported with it. But still, it's got a lot of these caveats, right? It's sort of like, well, I think I can almost do this here, but I can't. I need to provide something like an interface or do some kind of dependency injection to still bring those platform features over. So because of that, because of all those caveats and because of kind of the maintainability around it, Net Standard as well has kind of reached its end. So if we think of Net Standard 2.1 is sort of the latest and will also be the last release out there. So we've got essentially this like double whammy in the .NET world where we've got forms kind of reaching the end of its life cycle out there. And then we've also got some of the components that it's built on sort of, reaching their life cycle as well, sort of with that Net Standard. So where do we go, right? For us, we're going to go to .NET MAUI then and the .NET platform. And so what you could think of this is, this transition that we're going to be making here is sort of a logical next step, if you will, right? We know that .NET isn't really just this server platform anymore. It's sort of this runtime that's available on all these different platforms that we can make use of. So Microsoft looked at that and said, how do we make this nice, right? How do we make our developers happy? What can we do to give them features that they're going to love? And that's where we got .NET 6 and also .NET 6 and 7 and also .NET MAUI. And so what we're going to be talking about here is sort of that transition. MAUI, if you're wondering what it stands for, it's the Multi-Platform App UI. And we had it come into GA, general availability, earlier this year. That came out with .NET 6 support initially, and now just recently with the release of .NET 7, we've got some additional new features out there and some additional new support that came along with that. .NET MAUI is going to be available for Android, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, and Windows. Just like with forms out there. There can be more platforms brought into the future as well. These are the main platforms today, but perhaps in the future, the community will build out and add additional support. Again, Maui is sort of a our next transition piece out here. It's not exactly something that is entirely ground up, built from scratch, brand new. It's sort of the next generation of forms, if you could think of it from that perspective, right? So all those cool things that we were able to do out there in forms, that same concept of being able to interact with a button and have it become like a native control, all that kind of idea still carries over here to Maui. We're just going to have kind of a more streamlined, more elegant, and more unified experience with it. And so if we kind of look at what the ecosystem looks like here now, it's kind of insane, right? So when we talk .NET 7, and we take a look kind of here, you can see we've got all these different endpoints coming in, cloud web, mobile, all this kind of good stuff here being brought into .NET 7. So it's now this new standardized set of base class libraries that all these different platforms can support. So, again, in the past, we had to worry about like, well, okay, I'm doing some Xamarin out here. I can't use these features, or the way I need to interact with this is going to be a little bit different because I'm on Android or iOS. Now we've got this nice set of consistent APIs, nice set of consistent libraries that we could work with that really flatten out what .NET is and makes it so that when we go from platform to platform, or different environment out there, that we could do things in the very same or similar way, which is kind of incredible. If we look at it from a Maui perspective, then what that means is we've got sort of this stack out here. So at the very bottom, we have our actual platforms that we're running on. So we've got something like Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows. On top of that, we're going to have our runtimes. So you can see I'll call those our mobile platforms on the left there, have the same mono runtime that's actually running them. And then we've got the core CLR out there out on Windows. And then stacked on top of that, notice how it goes like all the way across out there is this .NET BCL. So the base class library out there is shared across all of these platforms now. And so that's going to be the big change that we had introduced with .NET 6 and kind of going forward with .NET 7 and into the future, is that we're going to have just one shared base class library that's going to be across all of our different platforms. Now, what also is going to change then is that we're going to have these, and also I'll kind of call them platforms on top of it. So we're going to have .NET 6 or .NET 7 and also Android features added to it, and also iOS features added to it, which means that we could have one code base. And as we'll kind of look as we see some of our example applications out here, we'll have one code base. But if we ever need to dip in and reach out for a feature that comes from iOS, or dip in and get a feature that comes from Android, we could do that. But we could do it in a way where we don't have to spool up a whole new project, or we don't have to find a way to bring things in via dependency injection. We could sort of do it right then and there in our project as we see fit. So it's kind of a really neat way for us to gain access to platforms and sort of have a bit more maintainable code out there. On top of all those then is we're going to have .NET MAUI. So just like I described with Xamarin Forms, what .NET MAUI is going to do for us is it's going to look at all the user interface controls across the platforms and other features as well for things like getting maybe location services or interacting with multimedia for like your camera or your microphone, things like that. But it's going to give us sort of a generic way to interact with those components where, as a developer, I maybe don't need to know all the intricacies about how iOS works, or I don't need to know the intricacies of how did a fragment get loaded on Android. Maui sort of takes all of that stuff and then gives us that same platform for everybody to run across or run against and do their work. And so as a Maui developer, all the way at the top there, as you can see, is my app code. So that's where I'll be doing anything that I need for my application. So if I need to build out my user interfaces, if I need to add my code out there to communicate with APIs or do anything like that, I really just sit up there all the way at the top. But again, the great part about this is it's all one unified stack. So from that .NET base class library on up, we've got sort of one playground to be working with. And I think that's kind of at least for me, a very exciting thing, and it's been a pretty nice transition to be working with so far. When we talk about Maui, as I had mentioned, it's going to come pre-packaged with a ton of controls that you need to build out your user interface. So this is a sample slide that I think I got, I'm going to say from David Orton now. I think I took that off maybe one of the blog posts, but it's a great example that shows just all the different controls that we have out there for Maui. So, any of the things that you need to get your like day in and day out job done, buttons, user interface, input output type controls for like data entry. If you need to do different types of layouts, you can see we've got things like a grid layout, stack layouts, all that kind of good stuff. And also, as the user interface library is matured, we've started to get some kind of, I would say, neater features. So one, for example, would be the shapes that we could see sort of at the top in the middle here, where shapes allow us to go and do some sort of custom drawing. So if you need to do something like round out an image, we could use those shapes to kind of clip out an image if we need to, or if we want to draw something custom on the screen. I get a lot of times from designers that I work with where they want something to be like pill shaped, or they want something to have a very specific shape. Well, the shapes library just allows me to kind of describe those and build that generically now in code, which I think is pretty neat. But kind of, out of the box, just about anything you would need to get up and running with building most applications. All right. So if you're interested in this, if Maui seems like something that is cool, the first thing that you're going to want to do is figure out how to get started. So first and foremost, depending on if you're coming from a Mac or for Windows, you're going to want to go and grab Visual Studio 2022. And with that, we're going to have all the support that we need for building a Maui application. And let me do this. I'm just going to switch over here. I've got my Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, and creating a new solution is pretty straightforward. We're just going to come out here and we're going to jump out and take a look at our multi-platform apps. Oh, let me get that out of the way here. And out on this screen, you can see we've got our .NET MAUI app. We also have a different type of .NET MAUI app that we can make, which is a Blazor app. I'm not going to get into that too much today, but for anybody who is a .NET web developer who would be interested in doing cross-platform development, the Maui Blazor app gives you kind of a way to build sort of a hybrid application using Maui as a shell. So similar to Electron or similar to a platform like that, not exactly the same, but gives you the ability to write Razor code and do all the stuff that you would do if you were writing a Blazor application, but have it hosted inside of a Maui shell app, which is pretty neat. All right, and creating one of these applications, again, pretty straightforward. I'm going to choose .NET 7 for mine, and I'm just going to give it, my cool app out here, and we'll get that created. Oh, just going to change one thing here real fast. Pick that up from before. There we go. You can see I've got my brand new application out here. And there's a few things that might look different to you if you've been a forms developer in the past. First and foremost, as you're going to see, we just have one project in here. So it's not a it's not a solution with 2 or 3 projects out there where we would in the past with forms have something like a shared core project library. And then we would have our Android and our iOS projects in there as well. Everything now has been consolidated into just this single project. Inside of here, then, you will notice that you'll have a lot of the things that you're probably familiar with in the past. So you would have out here, we'd have our app.xaml.cs where we would set up our application. We would have our XAML pages. So if you do your user interfaces with XAML, you've got everything that you need out there to get that set up, just like we would have had in forms in the past. But what you might notice that's different are a couple of things here. For one is we've got this new folder out here called Platforms. And Platforms is then where we can host all of our platform specific code. So when we think of like a forms application, each platform has things like configuration files, application startup requirements. You may have things that you need out there to configure and do push notifications, or be able to get some additional environment settings, things like that. All of that could be hosted inside of these folders now. So it's kind of a neat thing where we don't have all these different projects, but if I were to open up this folder, we'll take a look at the Android folder first. I've got something that is my main activity, which is going to be sort of our main entry point for Android. And you can see I could reference out here code that belongs to Android. In the same project, then, I could come out to our iOS project, and very similar, I could take a look at the app delegate, which is going to be our entry point for our application on iOS. And I could see as well, I could reference things like Foundation or using a UI kit. Both of these are going to be namespaces that belong just to iOS. So it's, again, going to give us the ability to mix and match, to use code that we need to on a platform basis inside of this one project. And there's a few other ways we'll see as well that we could interact with platforms as well, but kind of neat that I don't have to context switch and don't have to think about like, well, okay, I know if I want to get this feature, I have to go make this new project. It's something that potentially we could add just right here, right into our core MAUI application. A few other things that we have out here are going to be our program, which are going to be new, and some other pieces for resources. I'm going to come back to these in just a few minutes because we'll kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive in here. But again, just want to show from a high level, everything has been consolidated, and there's been some pretty cool new features added into here to make our lives even better and easier than they were when we were Forms developers. Right. One of the most common questions, though, that I get when I've talked to people about MAUI is, how do I transition existing applications? So if you were in the past a Xamarin Forms developer and you want to bring your application over to MAUI, you know, what does that look like? Is it rewriting from scratch? Is it, you know, sort of taking a look and migrating things little by little? Is it, you know, sort of, what does it look like? Because when you say MAUI, that it's a whole new UI platform, people get a little nervous, and I totally understand that. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take a quick look from a high level at an application that I migrated earlier this year. And this is actually the eShop mobile application that Microsoft has out here as a sort of a good enterprise example application. And I'm just going to show you sort of high level what it took to migrate it from our old Xamarin Forms implementation over to the new .NET MAUI implementation. And then for anybody who's interested out here, this code is available online. So if anybody wants to follow along later on or kind of go through this in a detailed process, you could follow the link up at the top there, and that will take you out to that eShop mobile application. All right. But the typical steps that we would have just from a high level, and then, like I said, we'll kind of look at the particulars in just a few moments here, are going to be starting off with what we had just done before. So creating a new solution, just like we saw. Come out here, choose new solution, and create sort of a new, project out here for .NET MAUI. From there, then we want to go through and we're going to find our Xamarin Forms project components and sort of just drag and drop those over. So that's going to be things like our user interface components. If we have stuff like XAML that we've written in the past, if we've got maybe some models that we've defined, resources, all that kind of good stuff, we're just going to want to take those from our old project, bring them over to our new project. And then the biggest thing that we're probably going to need to do out here, quite honestly, for this transition is just update namespaces. A lot of the Xamarin namespaces are going to be replaced with newer MAUI namespaces out there. So a lot of it's just sort of find and replace. Nothing really all too bad, nothing really all that difficult. Something that you could do pretty quick with, Control F, kind of replacing your way through there. And then from there, we're going to need to do some things just like migrating images and fonts and resources over. So those are going to be some components that may differ on each platform. Those might be some things that we need to configure on each platform out there, like if we want to use different fonts on different platforms, or if we have different images that get loaded on different platforms, just bringing those over as well and performing that migration. Next up, then, we're going to have NuGet package migration. So in some cases, we're going to have packages, maybe third-party packages that we've used in the past that will migrate right over. And we might also have other packages that don't need to be migrated. So a good example of that would be something like Xamarin Essentials that used to be packaged separately outside of Xamarin Forms. Now it's built right into Maui. So, we just need to pick and go through our way for doing that migration. And then finally, any kind of cleanup. The big cleanup that I've done, that I know that I had like kind of a good time with, I guess, in doing that migration, the migration for this project, is we've got all these neat new features that came with .NET 6 and .NET 7. So we could do a lot of cool things like global namespaces out there and just make use of some of the newer language features that we didn't have before. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take a look just sort of at like our starting point out here, and then see what the final product looks like. So this is the Forms version of the eShop mobile application. And you can see, just like I mentioned before, we would have a few different projects out here. I've got my core project, which is realistically what houses like 90% of the application. It's where I would do all of my user interface setup, build my view models, maybe define services and all that kind of good stuff out there. And then I've got my targets, which are going to be the platforms that the application runs on. So separately, we would have all of our code for iOS in this iOS project, for Android in the Android project, and then out on Windows as well. And if we're going to look just kind of briefly here, we'll take, grab just this login view today. And you can see that we've got our XAML out here from before. So just a couple of like really high level things. Again, we're just going to kind of briefly look at this, and I'll give you, and we'll kind of look at the final result as well. But we've got a lot of our namespaces out here for things like Xamarin.com. We're going to have different components underneath the sheet that we see. So again, we're going to have using for Xamarin Forms, all those kinds of things. So that's kind of our current state out there with Xamarin. And those are going to be things that are going to be potential for migration or updating after our migration. But most of this stuff, again, view models, views, some of these things are going to be kind of generic out here, where they're sort of maybe cross-platform already. They don't have a huge dependency on Xamarin Forms. But really what we need to do is kind of take these components and bring them over to our new project. All right, so let's go take a look here at what, grab our final project. It is this one here. There we go. Too many Visual Studios open. There we go. So if we look at like our migrated project, then you could see just in comparison, we've gone from having those 3 target platforms and then our 1 core runtime. In this new project, though, I've just got my singular project. So it's my eShop on containers project here. And then I've got my platforms integrated below inside of it. If we were to compare some of the things that needed to happen along the way for migration, I'll just close this up here. Right? If we take a look at the XAML that we had previously, we had that login view XAML before, where we had our namespaces pointing at Xamarin. If we were to go and look at our login view XAML out here, you could see we've got our new .NET MAUI schemas, right? So just new namespaces out here that we need to bring in for MAUI. Again, more or less just a, find and replace throughout your application. Likewise, if I come out here, you'll actually notice something that's a little bit different. First, I've got kind of a difference in the way that my code's written. So we could do things like set our namespaces differently here using .NET, using newer versions of .NET. You'll also notice my usings are a little bit more simplified out here. And that's because we could set up something like a global usings where we could bring those components in across our application. So, a lot of the transition that you're doing is just kind of this cleanup work. Just bring it over. Like I said, we would drag it over from views over to our new project here, and then just clean up your namespaces, clean up any references that you might have, and kind of go on from there. Generally, pretty straightforward. Even for a kind of a bigger enterprise application like this, the transition time that I had was roughly a day maybe a little bit over a day just to kind of get everything set up and migrated over to Maui. And this is a fairly large application with a lot of different components. So pretty, like I said, overall, pretty easy transition to get it up and lifted over to Maui. We're not going to be able to go through all of it today. Again, like I said, it still was about a day plus worth of work. So I did document the entire migration from Xamarin Forms over to Maui for that project. And likewise, you could see every single step that you need to do that migration out here at this link. It's available in that same source repository for the eShop Mobile's mobile project. So if you're looking to do a migration, if you just want to see what it looks like even before you do it for yourself, you can go and grab the old code. You can migrate it yourself to Maui. You could go look at the old solution and compare it to the new solution as well if you really want to dig in there and kind of get your hands dirty and see what it took to get that migrated. But like I said, it's not a rewrite. It's not a complete ground up rebuild, more or less just kind of a cleanup, migration and a cleanup more than anything else. Speaking of migration, there is actually a tool out there to help perform these migrations. It's not perfect. It's not going to solve every problem, but it's going to get a lot of the more common issues that you might have out there. And it's this .NET tool, which is the Upgrade Assistant. So what you would do is just drop out to a terminal, run to install this tool. So it's .NET Tool Update or Install for the Upgrade Assistant. And then you run the Upgrade Assistant and point it at your project or solution that you want to update. And so, like I said, that'll go through, attempt to solve a lot of the common issues that you would see with taking an application from Forms to Maui. And then from there, you might just have some project-specific configuration and cleanup to do afterwards. So again, some tooling just to make your life a little bit easier in performing that transition. But all of us here probably looking for the new hotness. Like, why? You know, it's great. You know, we've got to make this transition. We understand that, you know, kind of Forms is going away and Maui is making its way up. But what are the cool, compelling reasons that we want to make this transition as well, right? So let's take a look at a few of the cool things that we've got out here that I think are some of the bigger standouts for Maui that I'm really excited about. So a few of these things would be single project, our new Maui app out there, built-in dependency injection, some of the built-ins that come with Maui now and in the graphics view. So let's start with single project. As we saw out here before, a lot of times what you would end up with is your core project out there, and then all of your different target platforms. We don't have to worry about that anymore. You know, that managing all that stuff, managing all those platforms is kind of a huge pain. And now we've just got this one single project that holds all of our UI code in there. Obviously, we could still reach out and go do whatever we need on a platform basis, but no longer do we have to worry about like, okay, I've got to build this over here and then I've got to shim it over there. Everything could just essentially be available for us. We still may need to provide ways to access some platform code. Maybe we could do it via an interface, or maybe we could do it using some compiler directives and things like that. But it's all been sort of flattened out and merged into this one project. So something for me that, like I said, I'm pretty excited about not having to context switch and jump to all those projects about anymore. All right. Next up, if I could find my mouse, there we are, is something that I'm very excited about, I guess. And this is the Maui app. Previously in the Xamarin Forms world, when we wanted to set up our application, we kind of had two different spots. You had your initial entry point, which would have been on your platform. And then from there, you would also have your Xamarin Forms app object, which would kind of be the start of the Forms application. And while it worked pretty good, it was a little disjointed because sometimes you would have to think like, well, if I want to build the service, where do I register it? Or on this platform, if I want to configure fonts, I've got to do it this way maybe. Or, you know, if I need to do this like component registration out here, maybe we've got like a third-party library brought in. Where do we do it? Additionally, I know a lot of people that do web development, and always the kind of the first question that I would get asked is, you know, hey, like, how do I configure everything? You know, in the .NET, like in the web world, when we're building applications or building services and things like that, we've got kind of a very simple builder application or builder process that we can define everything, and it's fairly straightforward and kind of modular. And so that process has been brought over here to Maui. And so now we've got this Maui builder that we can use to do all of our configuration for our applications out here. So simply, you can see in the code that I've got over here on the right-hand side, we register our Maui application. That's going to be our entry point for our application there. We could do things like configure fonts. So we can say, hey, for this font, bring it in and use this name throughout the application. So, refer to it as Open Sans Regular. We could set up all of our services as well through dependency injection. So if we want to bring in, singleton services, things that'll be used throughout the application we could register those here in one singular place. Dependency injection has become sort of a first-class citizen, as we'll kind of look at a little bit here in a little bit more depth in the future. But we can get all those set up and configured in one single place. So it's to me, this is a pretty exciting feature. I know it doesn't seem like a big thing, but like it's a pretty great. It's pretty great that we now have a single place for doing all of our app setup and registration. You don't have to go and hunt and peck through different platform projects or see where it was, maybe registered in a different project, here or there. Everything is sort of just laid out bare out here in this builder and set up in one singular place. So again, something I'm pretty excited about to have here in Maui. To kind of continue on with dependency injection, it's something that we never had out of the box first class support for in the past in Forms, right? We had the dependency service, which is a service locator. But now with .NET MAUI, we've got a built-in dependency injection container that we could use throughout our applications, right? So just out there in that builder, we could go through, register all of our services. We could do things like register, in this example, we've got singleton and transient services that we're registering. So singletons will be created and held onto throughout the lifetime of the application. But we could also build something like a transient service, which would be created new every time we request it. So good for things like view models or good for things like pages as well. Like I mentioned, dependency injection is first class. So if we go and take a look out here, got this cool Monkey Finder application that was built for some training materials from Microsoft. And you can see that they've got their services registered out here. And in particular, the two I want us to take a look at are these Monkey Details view model and details page. So I know, again, if you're coming from sort of a web development world in .NET, a lot of things that we'll have or that we'll expect are things like constructor injection for dependencies from our dependency injection container. So not something that we've always had in, exactly out of the box with Forms. But now in Maui, if we come through here and if we register our services out here, and in this application, we're going to be using our app shell as our root. You can see that we're going to register our routes out here for navigation in our shell page. And what I want to show here is if we take a look at this page, so when I try to navigate to this route for the application, if I take a look at the details page here and its constructor, you'll notice that I've got a constructor that has the view model injected right in there or defined right in there to be provided. So because we're using app shell in Maui and because we've registered our view model and our page with the dependency injection container, we now, Maui will take care of creating the instance of our view model, creating the instance of our page, and then providing that view model into our page, and it's immediately available. So kind of neat. Like we didn't have to bring in any kind of third-party libraries. We didn't have to do any additional big configuration or anything like that. It's all just done out here in our Maui program and all just configured up front. And then we get all those cool dependency injection benefits going forward. If you are somebody who likes a different dependency injection setup out there, you can still use those as well, right? So if you want to use AutoFac or Ninject or something like that, you could still use those as well. They don't have all the great built-in support like the built-in dependency injection container has, but there's nothing stopping you from continuing to use those, right? So still kind of a great experience right out of the box out there. The next thing that I love here are all the built-ins that come with Maui. And a lot of these are kind of quality of life changes, I would say, more than anything. Um, First one, it would be what was in the past Xamarin Essentials is now built right into Maui. So interaction for things like getting location information or dealing with file system information, getting some of the locations where you may want to store cache files, stuff like that, all built into Maui at this point in time. So you don't have to go out and grab a separate library. It's essentially all baked right in there, ready to go with the platform. These other built-ins that we have then, I think are kind of awesome and just save a ton of headache, I guess is kind of the big way to call it out there. I'm actually going to jump back just really briefly to our old application and just show off in the past what we would have to do for things like setting up different icons that are used in the application. You could see out here on our iOS application, I might have to provide multiple different sizes for icons for different display densities on iOS platforms. I would have to go through and configure a unique launch screen for my application. It even goes further in here. I would have an assets library where I'd have to provide all these different app icons. And if you've ever had to go through this process, you know it's somewhat arduous. In Maui, though, this has kind of been simplified down quite a bit. So if I were to look at my resources folder out here, you could see I've got a few things defined. I've got fonts, so I could just provide all my fonts into here and we could register them out here with our builder. I've got some images where I've got SVG files defined, and that's kind of a cool thing I'll talk about here in a moment. And then I've got a few other files defined out here. I've got my app icon, and then I've got my what will end up being my splash screen icon. First and foremost, what you'll notice is that these images aren't something like we would traditionally have in a Forms application. They're not PNG files or JPEG files. These are SVG files. SVG files, if you're not familiar with them, it's essentially just a markup language to define a vector image that could be scaled up, scaled down, kind of indefinitely out there to different resolutions. What Maui is going to do then is it's going to take these SVG definitions, and when I build my application, depending on which platform that it's running on, it's going to add all the things that are needed for that platform, or it's going to build, all the things that are needed for that platform. So for example, with my bot image out here, because I've added it to images and because it sees it as an SVG image with the type, the build action type out here of Maui image, is when it builds the application for iOS, and we can actually go take a look at this in the Finder really quick. Come out here. It will generate all the images that iOS would expect. So I'm going to do that. Let this run just really quick here. Might have cleaned these up before the project, so we'll just try and get these really fast generated. But what it's like I said, what it's going to do is it's going to generate my splash screen for me. It's going to generate my app icons for me. And then any other images that I've added into the application or any other SVGs that I've added into the application, it's going to go through and it's going to generate platform specific renderings for those. So for example, on iOS, it's going to create sort of multiple different sizes of the image that'll render out and look good on every platform. Same thing is going to happen out there on iOS or on Android and on Windows as well. So it's going to know how to look at those SVG images and build out the correct corresponding images needed for the platform in all the right sizes that are needed for all those platforms as well. All right, so I'll let this run here quick. It is the first time it's running, so it's just going to take a moment as it goes through and builds all these things. But as it's doing this, you can see we're getting filled up with a bunch of cool stuff here. We're almost there. There we go. Let's go see our application here, right? And you can see what it generated out here for my application is not just, the SVGs aren't included themselves, but it did take that .NET bot SVG that we had defined in our application and created a nice high resolution PNG for us at compile time. So I didn't have to go through and ask my designers like, hey, can I get a 1x, a 2x, and a 3x version of this icon? All I had to do was just put the SVG in there and let the rest of it render out. Same thing would be true then for our different app icons and all that kind of good stuff. So if anybody's ever had to do this in the past, you probably know how much of a headache it is. So having these sort of built in and having that feature built in there for us is incredible. Same thing, just not having to generate that stuff and having the overall SVG support has been a huge saver, time saver for me. And will end up being a huge time saver, I'm sure, for everybody as they build their applications. So really great set of features for built-ins. Next up, if anybody knows me much, they know that I like to draw my own stuff on mobile. And one of the greatest new features that I think that we've got out here in Maui is the graphics view. So out of the box, Maui is going to build all of its controls so that they look native, or that they are native for each platform. It's not that they look native, they are the native controls for each platform. If anybody has ever tried to build a mobile application, especially if you're working with people that have like a very specific design that they want to go for, you'll know that, sometimes the platforms don't match what the designer wants. And so with the graphics view now, what we have are two different ways for building and defining totally custom drawn controls. The first way that's going to be kind of, I'll say like the out of the box way with Maui is platform native drawing. So what we have there is essentially all the different drawing libraries that exist on the platforms wrapped up in a way where we can access all the native drawing libraries and build our own controls. So what's cool about that is it doesn't have any additional third-party dependencies. We don't have to go and install any other packages or anything like that. We could just jump in there. We're going to have a canvas and we could just start drawing on that canvas and build whatever we want to build, which is pretty awesome. If you really want to get in and have an exact, so the only thing there would be, there can be some slight differences across platforms with drawing, or maybe how fonts get rendered and things like that. If you really want like full 100% exact control across platforms, you can also have that graphics view use something like Skia Sharp. So Skia Sharp, Skia rather, is the drawing engine that's used for things like Chrome or Flutter, all that kind of good stuff, right? And we could jump in there and use that to do all of our drawing as well. So something that I really like, I think is great, and gives us the ability to sort of extend Maui in a pretty simple but consistent way to new platforms. So here you can even see I've got just kind of a sample out here. This is one of the control libraries that I'll show in just a moment. But we could build, just on a singular platform, controls that look like they belong to iOS, the Fluent controls that look more like they belong for Windows, or the material design controls that would belong for Android. So all running in one platform, totally customizable and up for us, just, drawing an interaction built for us to set up there. If you are interested in that, so there actually is there are some projects that are already out there that have some of these neat graphics views pre-built for you. So this one is the Maui Graphics Controls Library, where you could add it. And they've got support for a bunch of pre-built controls that look platform specific. So if you're working with somebody and they just want every platform to have that material design that comes from Android, they've got a bunch of controls already that are pre-built and have that material design out there, which I think is cool. In addition, I think this is a pretty awesome start for a new control library. This is from Javier. If anybody knows him, he's pretty prolific in kind of building cool stuff out here for us as Forms developers and now as Maui developers. This is the Aloha Kit library. And it has just a bunch of additional controls, things that may not like normally be part of a platform's library available to us as developers. So different types of like radial indicators, toggle switches, like a ratings controls. I think again, like a really good set of controls that you can go and use either as an example for yourself to go and extend and do your own custom drawing, or to just bring into your application and just have those consistent displays across platforms out there. All right. One of the other big things that I get asked a lot for, for making the transition from forms to Maui is what's the community like? Like we had all these, almost, 10 some years of nearly a decade of Xamarin forms. Is everything going away? Is all my stuff going to stop working? The answer is no, right? And the community that we had there before is the same community that we have for Maui. And by and large, the same big sets of libraries that we had out there that were used in the past are all available for us out here in Maui. A few ones that I just want to throw out here and just kind of recommend. The first one is going to be the .NET Community Toolkit. If anybody hasn't seen this before, it's from Microsoft. It is just a bunch of different components that you can use in your application for doing things like setting up your view models, for having observable collections, doing some messaging throughout your application and all that kind of good stuff. So, and a ton of source generators as well. So instead of having to write properties that do all the work to do like change notifications, you essentially can just add a property, give it a little bit of an attribute, and it will get you up and running. So this is something that was previously available out there for forms, but is now available for us out here on Maui as well. So really cool set of library components that you could use to get up and running. Near and dear to my heart, there are a couple of MVVM libraries. Specifically for me, Reactive UI. Reactive UI has support for Maui right out the box there. So you could just start up your Maui application, add in Reactive UI, and be up and running. And also the Prism team has done a really good job of getting Prism support out there as well. So, if you've been using those in the past, I know these are two pretty common MVVM frameworks that people have used for setting up their applications. These, along with a bunch of other ones, have already made the transition to Maui. So it's not like, again, you're going to have to start from square one. And then Alan out here has gone crazy, I don't know, and built and ported a bunch of components that he had to Maui, and then went like overboard and made all these awesome templates as well. So if anybody has ever used any of the Shiny components from Xamarin Forms, Alan's gone ahead and ported all those over for Maui. And like I mentioned, also built this really awesome template, set of templates for bringing those components and pre-configuring them for your Maui application. So I know that's something in the past that could have been a little bit difficult in the forms world of like, well, I want to add SQLite, but I'm not sure where to configure it. Or I want to do, Bluetooth LE interactions, and I'm not sure exactly how to get it all set up here. Alan's made it as easy as a checkbox. You just come in, bring his templates in. They're available out here at his GitHub, and just tick, 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 add all the features that you want. Hit continue, and it will bring in all the dependencies and get everything set up for you. So not only is it, brought over to Maui, it's even easier now that we're in the Maui world to get all that stuff up and running and configured. So pretty exciting, I feel like. All right. So if you are excited about this and you want to learn more, where could you go and what could you get to dig in deeper? One option that you would have out here is the Enterprise Application Patterns using .NET MAUI book, written by me. It's free. You can go grab that from Microsoft. The link here is, I'll bring this up here. It's at aka.ms/maui-ebook. It is a book that's going to describe how to build, what a Maui application is, what are some design considerations to have when building your application. How can you pattern things out? How do you do data passing throughout the application? All that kind of good stuff. So what would it take to build like a real enterprise application? It will kind of take you all the way through. And like I said, the price is great. It's free. You have no reason to not go pick it up today. If you are new to Maui, or if you've never done forms in the past, there's also a lot of really great content out there that Microsoft has put together around the .NET MAUI workshop. It will take you from square one all the way to the end of building an application. So if you've never done anything before, like I said, start you off, really great tutorials, really detailed, and help you get through sort of building your first application out there. And likewise, that is available out here at the link shown above. So tinyurl.com/Maui-workshop. All right, so I know we've covered a lot of territory here, gone over a lot of things, hopefully kind of gave you an idea of what's new and what's exciting out there in Maui and what you could do to bring your applications to forms in Maui going forward. And I guess with that, I'm going to go, I know we've got a few more minutes here. And I think we can answer some questions. So let me jump out here. I'm going to take a look in the chat. Let me see if I can grab this here. So I don't see any questions quite yet. Let me go see out here. I'm going to check. On YouTube, so let me go see. So I do have a question out here on YouTube. Anybody already using Maui for production apps or apps in development? I can speak from my team at least. We've got a bunch of applications that we're in the process of transitioning and bringing up for a lot of our clients. So I know we're going to be looking to go live here with with at least a handful of these within the next few months or so. What's our experience with it so far? So like I said, so far so good. It's been a pretty, like I said, fairly smooth transition. I was personally kind of, I'm always a little bit of a Luddite when it comes to new technologies and things like that. I always want to be a little bit more cautious, but transition for me at least has been fairly straightforward. So. Yeah. So another question here that we've got, what would be some beginner friendly resources to learn Maui? Let me go grab. I'm going to bring this link up here. This is the one that I referenced in my project, or in my presentation, excuse me, but this is the .NET MAUI workshop. This is a great place for new developers to start off their journey. It's going to start you kind of like all the way from the top, like, hey, I don't really know what Maui is. I don't know what, what the platform really looks like or anything like that. How do I learn how to sort of build my first application? What are some of the different moving parts? So like, I've never heard of MVVM. What does that mean? How do I get it integrated into my application? How do I do navigation from page A to page B and all that kind of good stuff? This is sort of a great place to start. And then they've also got these linked out here for me, which makes this easier to show as well, are going to be the docs. Second to none, I would say, and maybe I'm biased on this, but I feel like Microsoft does a fantastic job about writing really good documentation out here on MSDN or on the Microsoft Learn to provide, detailed guides of like, how do you build your app? How do you get up and running? How do you get everything installed? So this is where I would probably say is going to be your best place to go. These two spots here would be your best place to go and start learning. We had another question here. Can I say something more about the Blazor app option? Sure. Yeah. The Blazor app option gives you, kind of like I'd mentioned, it gives you the ability to have a Blazor application sort of embedded and running inside of your Maui app. So you could use that as your primary UI where you're, showing, Razor pages and you're interacting with Razor pages out there as well. Or you could use it as sort of a sub component in your application. So maybe there's just one page where you need some Blazor components, or you would like to use some of that Razor UI setup out there. You could also embed it as a separate component later on. Again, just from a time perspective, it kind of gets pretty deep, but we'll see here. Let's go and I'll grab. There is. I'll see if I could find it. I don't have it at the moment, but there's some good from the .NET Conf. There was a really great presentation just recently out there with James and Elian going through the Blazor hybrid, and I would recommend getting that video. I'll see if I can grab it when we're done here, and I'll try and post it out there on the Discord. Okay, yep. Next question we've got here. People are saying Maui took a lot of unfixed problems from forms. What's my standpoint on that? And do you think it'll get addressed by Microsoft for the next major release? Yeah. So again, Maui was built on top of forms. It's not as if it was completely thrown away and they started from scratch on everything and sort of had a whole new framework. So some of the issues that we may have had out there in the past with forms would have been brought over to Maui. I know, the first kind of release for Maui was getting everything ported over. Now that we've got this new BCL that we're all working with .NET 6, we're working with .NET 7 now, bringing everything over to there and making sure that everything looks good. And I know that the next focus for release is going to be fixes in polish, right? I know this is something that David Orton had talked a lot about in the .NET Conf presentation, is that we want to make things nicer. We want to make things better. We're here, we're on this platform now. So what can we do to make everything, better? How do we fix some warts that maybe were out there before? I know that if we look at some of the transition, even to .NET 7, there's a lot of little performance that's gone into there. Jonathan Peppers, as part of the team, has done a lot of work around performance. And so, I would imagine those types of things continuing on as we go to .NET 8 and our next release of Maui. Let's see. Does Maui app create builder work as top level statements, or is there some convention that requires the create Maui app wrapper? I'm not fully sure. I can kind of show how it all gets instrumented out here. So if we take a look, we'll just use this Monkey Finder application as an example. You will see here is my Maui program. And out here, it's a static class that has a static method that's called, and that static method is going to return this Maui app object. If I dive all the way back and find out where this is getting called here, though, just go find all references. Grab that one. At the end of the day, this method is getting called and created and brought back into our platform-specific code. So if you ever needed to do anything like maybe provide something beforehand or do some additional configuration out on your platform here, I'm just kind of coding on the fly with this one a little bit. My cool stuff that I want to do, right? You can customize that and change that up on each platform as you would need. So I hope that answers your question out there. Will Core CLR ever replace mono runtime completely? I am the wrong person to ask that question. I am going to say, I don't think so. I think it would be cool. I think it would be great for us to have all one runtime out there. I think eventually it's something that could definitely happen. I have no insight into it. I have no idea, to be honest with you. I have a deep place in my heart for mono. It's where I got started with .NET. myself. So I'd be a little sad to see it go away, but I don't know. I can't answer that question, unfortunately. Do you think Mono will give the mobile ecosystem of .NET a huge boost, or what do you see as the main advantages to use it over something like React Native or Flutter? Yeah, it's a good question. Why would you choose one or the other? And I think that depending on who you are or who your team is, there are different options that may work better for you, right? So if you are a .NET team, actually, we'll take a different start from this. If you're already doing a lot of React code and you're a web developer, React Native might be a good option for you, right? If you're already familiar with that code, if it's already something that you do day in and day out, there's no need to have to like just switch to Maui just because, right? Um, on the flip side, though, like if you are a .NET developer, there are so many interesting, weird little things that you've probably picked up over the years that will carry over to your Maui application. So, just little things that I could think of like every day that I deal with, interacting with databases, communicating with APIs, all that kind of good stuff. Like there's a lot of like sort of snowball turned into, like a snowball turned into like a huge rolling snowball or whatever that's picked up steam over coming down the mountain. You get the idea. But the idea is you already have all this knowledge about .NET. Why not continue to use it, right? So if you already know how to do .NET and you already know how to build APIs for it, well, now that if you want, you can build a mobile application with all that knowledge that you already have. And so you could do cool things like, my team does a lot of this where we'll build NuGet packages that my backend team will build that define all my models and that build out all the API client and everything like that. And they just share it off to me and I could pull it into my application and it works perfectly. There's no retranslation, right? Because if you have a backend team that's like .NET and now you've got a front end team that's maybe JavaScript or, if they're writing Dart for Flutter, you're going to have to reinterpret everything, is an int an int an int? Is the way that I perform this validation on this object exactly the same? So there's like a lot of different concerns, issues, whatever you want to call them out there when you go to a new language. So like I said, choose the thing that makes the sense for your team. And a lot of the teams that I work with are .NET teams. So they don't have to go and learn a whole new language and all the weird paradigms about packaging and all the weird stuff that comes with learning a new language and kind of getting your feet dipped in there. They could take all that stuff that they already know, hit the ground running, work in tooling that they're already familiar with, and just kind of get up and go. Question out here: Sour Patch Kids or Swedish Fish? I think I know who the person who asked this question. And the answer is clearly Swedish Fish. Do not mess around with Sour Patch Kids. Swedish Fish forever. Another question here. Since you already wrote an ebook for Microsoft on Maui, are there any plans on your side to publish more books on this in the future? Good question. Writing a book is a lot of work. It is not easy. So I don't know that I have any plans for it at the future. I do have a lot of plans for doing some more content, doing some streams, getting some stuff out there on YouTube. It's been kind of a crazy year for me. So I just haven't exactly had a chance to get some of that stuff out there, but it's definitely in the works. Definitely want to get the word out there a little bit more. And personally for me, I like doing like YouTube videos and kind of presentations like that. I feel like it's a little bit more interactive and a lot of the stuff doesn't require as much prep if I'm going to do a video. So when you write a book, it's sort of in stone. It's tough. Next question. Do I have any packages other than Aloha and the community kit that I often use? Oh, wow. That is a great question. Let's see. Things that I find myself often using. For me, reactive extensions and reactive UI. You could go look at any of the other presentations that I've given over the years. You could see I'm pretty opinionated on that. I'm a real big fan of those components. I think it just makes building an application just so much better. But again, not for today. I don't need to get on my soapbox about that. There is these MAUI Community Toolkit is another set of controls and components that was available previously out there, and I'll just bring up that as well. So the MAUI Community Toolkit, again, just more components that add features that you might want out of the box. So just try to pull up. I don't know if they've got the listing of them here. They might have them more out here. It's one of these things that you pull in and use all the time, but don't think about. So just a bunch of pre-built like extensions, value converters, different, types of views. And for me, probably the biggest one would be C# markup. I'm not a terribly huge fan of XAML. I've been using XAML since the Windows Phone days, or writing XAML since the Windows Phone days. And I really like markup. So I think that it's a great way where I could just sit in C# and get all of the awesome features of C# in my code. I guess that's all I'll say here for now. Are there any other extensions for VS that I would recommend to get to make MAUI development more comfortable? That's a good question. I don't know that I have an awesome answer for it, to be perfectly honest. Let me think about that one for a moment. See if I come back to it. What are some of my favorite MAUI controls? Buttons. I know I say buttons a lot in the presentation, but I like the grid. Big fan of the MAUI grid. You should only use the grid for doing all of your layout, or doing most of your layout, as far as I'm concerned. Grid and stack layout. Don't use any other layout. Those two are the GOAT. Do I think that I will ever see official Linux support for MAUI? I don't know. As time goes on, perhaps. Linux is a tricky one. What does Linux mean? Is it you talking about GNOME or GTK or KDE or whatever's still out there? I don't really know 100%, but it's tough to say what exactly Linux is, and I know that there's a lot of work that would go into that. So I know it's something that I'm sure the MAUI team would love to do and work on. Just hard for me to say 100% whether or not I would see that as an officially supported thing. So let's see, any other some notes out, other questions out here. Let me see. All right, not seeing too much else. I will hang out in the chat out here though as well and see if there's anything else that comes through. And be available out there out on the Discord. So if anybody else has any questions or comments or thoughts, we'll hang out there throughout the day today as well. So if you have anything, just throw them out there and tag them with MAUI. Other than that though, just want to thank everybody for their time. Hopefully you learned a little bit about MAUI and the transition from forms over to here. And I hope you all have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.